Okay, so now we are going to move on to Janine from the ASB, who's going to be talking to us about the important work of the Accounting Standards Board, particularly about the work program for 2024 to 2026. Janine, you can go ahead.
Thank you very much, and a very good morning to all of you. I'm sure you're probably all just waiting to put your toes in the sand somewhere or relax with your family and friends. But just as the last few days, I thought it was appropriate for us to talk to you about our work program at the ASB and what we plan to do going forward and to get your views on it. We will be having a few of these sessions again next year. So if you would like to join in one of our roundtable discussions next year, you're more than welcome to do so if you need some time to digest what I'm going to tell you today. But I think just to summarize, I mean, the Accounting Standards Board, we set the accounting standards for government in South Africa. We issue standards of GRAP, which are based on international public sector accounting standards and IFRS. We are a Schedule 3A public entity and we report to the National Treasury. And really, as a result, we need to prepare our strategic plans, our budgets, etc., in accordance with the PFMA, which means that we need to take a fairly long-term view towards our planning. So you would see that we are issuing a 3-year work program consultation, which is really to give certainty to our stakeholders in terms of what we think we should be doing over this period. But obviously helps us achieve all of our sort of legislative and other requirements in terms of being a public entity. So I think firstly, why are we doing this? I think I've alluded to this, but I think very importantly is that we develop a work program, and you might ask yourself what that is. Well, this is really the document that drives our standard setting activities for a period of time, and we do it for 3 years because, as I mentioned, we are a public entity, so it aligns with our sort of budgeting time horizon, which is 3 years, as you would know. We are currently executing our work program for 2021 to 2023, so that's up to 31 March 2023. And we are about halfway through that at the moment, but we need to start working on what it is that we think we are going to do moving forward. And obviously, we'd like your feedback on this. The comment deadline is the 18th of March, so we do still have quite a bit of time to deal with this. But I think it's a nice way to close off the year for you to think about some ideas that you might have for us. Perhaps you can reflect on this while you are enjoying some sun or something cold to drink over the holidays and come back with some feedback in the new year. So I think firstly, let's have a look at what our key priority is really for the 2024 to 26 period. And our strategic theme is taking stock. And really, as you would know, that the financial reporting landscape is growing at an ever-changing pace. As much as we need to adapt and look to the future, we also really need to take time to assess where we are, what we aim to achieve, and really how we can do things better. So we've decided that our theme will be taking stock. And this really means that we will take time to enhance our existing standards, improve their application, which will really help to facilitate better policy development and enhances the available information to decision makers in government, which is really quite important during this time. As much as I think everybody feels really constrained and tired about having to put in extra time to deal with a variety of things because of COVID, I think now is the time that we actually need good, relevant, solid information in the government's financial statements so that we can start making better decisions, but also start making decisions that really look to the future and deal with some of the issues that we find ourselves in terms of resources. So I think what you would see is that our strategic themes and our focus areas are somewhat cyclical. So what this means is that we really go through phases in terms of what it is that we want to deal with on our work program. So you would have seen in our first work program for 2017 to 20, we worked quite a bit on dealing with new accounting issues. And really this was driven by the fact that the standards had just been implemented. There were a number of emerging issues that we needed to deal with. So we spent a lot of that 3 years actually working on addressing those issues. Last year, we, in the last work program cycle, the one that we are busy with at the moment, 2021 to 2023, We had fewer of the local projects, but have also been looking at a number of reviews, a couple of other research projects that we've had a look at, and we are trying to catch up with some international projects at the same time. So I think in terms of our strategic theme of taking stock, the first thing that we really need to have a look at is where are we in terms of our standards development and adoption. So firstly, to say that we obviously develop standards of GRAP that provide users of GPFRs, means general purpose financial reports, with information to hold entities accountable and to make decisions. So that's really our overall objective when we issue any standard or any pronouncement of the board. If we think about where we are, there's really two aspects to think about. The first one is really, is the suite of standards as they are comprehensive? And the second one is, where are we with adoption? So in terms of the suite of standards, we do have a comprehensive suite, although we do have some gaps. And I think the most significant one is a standard on social benefits. And when I talk about social benefits, there's probably two very broad aspects. The one deals with payments to individuals and households in cash. So this would typically be things like the SASSA grants, potentially the UIF grants that are paid, the TERS grant that got paid, all of these kinds of direct support from government in cash. There are also in-kind benefits that get provided. So just if you think about universal healthcare and education that gets provided for those that qualify, so that would also need to be addressed. And another component is intergovernmental transfers. But on the expenditure side, I think we do have a standard. On the revenue side, it's really just the expense side that needs to be dealt with. So apart from what I've just described, we really do have standards for everything. In terms of adoption, not all entities have adopted standards of GRAP. You would know that a large chunk of the public sector has adopted our standards, and this slide really reflects that. And at a national, provincial, and local government level, let me start with local government because they are the easiest to deal with. All municipalities apply standards of GRAP. They have for a very long period of time already, as far back as 2007, 2008. If we move on to provincial government, the provincial departments do not apply GRAP at this point in time. They apply the modified cash basis. Some government business enterprises either apply IFRS or standards of GRAP, and this would really depend on the nature of the activities that they undertake. And if we have a look on a national level, it's still the national departments that also don't apply our standards. And again, the SOEs and GBEs, state-owned entities or government business enterprises, would either apply IFRS or GRAP, again, depending on the nature of their activities. So as you can see, really a key focus area would be to understand why it is that the national and provincial departments have not yet moved to accrual accounting. This is obviously a decision that the Minister of Finance needs to make to approve their implementation. A key component of that is obviously an integrated financial management system, which we know they are working on, but probably there could be some activities that we undertake to progress some of the work on adoption prior to the system being implemented. But that's, of course, something that I think we would like to focus on as part of this particular work program cycle. So in terms of how would we go about deciding what projects we want to bring onto our work program, there's two things we have a look at. We have a look at the criteria of the specific projects themselves, and then we have a look at the prioritization, and that focuses quite a lot on resources and urgency. So just to run through them very quickly, if we have to take projects onto our work program, just looking at the merits of the individual projects, we really need to have a look at whether or not there is guidance on this particular issue. And if there isn't, is it likely to result in divergence in practice? Is there inconsistent application of existing guidance? So is there, for example, a new transaction that's in the market that the standards don't exactly deal with that, so maybe there's a need for an interpretation. We do have a look at the importance of maintaining alignment with either ICSIS or IFRS, because we use that as a basis to develop our standards. And then obviously we do need to have a look at maintaining our standards. Obviously things become outdated over time, so it's always good for us to circle back and make sure that everything is relevant and consistent. So obviously we would have a look at these things in deciding the merits of individual projects. But I think what's important is we have a limited amount of resources, and obviously we are acutely aware of the fact that our stakeholders have limited resources, both in terms of implementation of standards, but also in commenting on standards. And obviously, we really need stakeholders to comment and be involved in the development process so that the standards are relevant and implementable. So, of course, we would have a look at our resources in terms of both time and money. We have a look at the financial environment within which entities operate. And this is really trying to link our standards implementation to certain reforms that might be happening. So, for example, at some stage, there was a direct linkage between the implementation of certain standards to the MSCOA project, the Municipal Standard Chart of Accounts project, just because we knew that some of the information that would be generated from the MSCOA might actually help some of the implementation of the standards. Important for us, we do have a look, as I mentioned, at the capacity of stakeholders to participate in our public consultation process. For those of you that are unfamiliar with our processes, we actually use volunteers within the public sector to assist us in developing some of the standards. So when I say assisting, it's really commenting on, providing input on, telling us what's appropriate to implement, etc. So from a developmental perspective, it's also important that stakeholders are able to provide their time to do so. And then having a look at resources available to implement standards. The last one is really looking at the impact and the urgency of the issue. So obviously, when we do have a look at projects, we would look to see, well, if there are a really large chunk of transactions that are either the accounting is really diverse and it's going to have a significant impact on entities' financial statements and the way in which users are going to use that information, then obviously we would give higher priority to that to another kind of project. So that's really just to give you an overview of how we will decide what it is that we are going to do. So now that we know where we are, we know more or less the parameters within which we are going to select projects, and so that you have an understanding of that, it's really to think about what is it that we want to achieve. So the key activity of the ASB is really setting standards of GRAP, which take the form of standards, interpretations, directives, and guidelines. As the staff, we do issue a number of other things when we'll talk about those just now, but those are really the key areas of activity at the ASB. So within our sort of standard setting objective, we always have a look to see, are there gaps that exist that we need to close? Are there international standards that we should adopt? Do we need to enhance or maintain any of our existing standards? And what can we do to promote the adoption of our standards? So our proposals in the document are as follows. So the gaps that exist in our literature at the moment, I think the most significant one is social benefits and transfer expenses. As I said, the entities that are most affected by this project, and there could be spin-offs from the social benefits project, because not everything that government pays directly to individuals and households are necessarily social benefits. There could be another kind of benefit that may require a separate standard, or could just be a straight out liability in the provision standard. We are still trying to work all of this out. But things like the SARS, the UIF, the Compensation Fund, SASSA, the Social Development Agency, and there's a couple of others where obviously there's a limited number of entities, but a large amount of money that is flowing from those entities with a consequential large liability that should be on government's balance sheet. So we think our focus area for the next 3 years should be on those. We've already started with social benefits, but given the complexity we are not going to finish that within our current work program. In terms of international standards that we should potentially adopt, there is a number of projects that are going on at the ASB in terms of revenue, in terms of leases, and a couple of other aspects. They are also working on issuing an equivalent of IFRS 13 to deal with the measurement of public sector assets and liabilities, although it will extend beyond just fair value and deal with replacement cost, cost of fulfillment, and a number of other real public sector measurement related issues. And there are some changes to the conceptual framework. And just given the timing of completion of these projects, it's unlikely that the ASB will complete its revenue project in this current work program cycle. So it's not really feasible for us to start thinking about adopting something if they haven't completed it as yet. The measurement project, although still in draft, I think has a greater chance of being completed soon, which we could then work on and would resolve a number of issues that we are experiencing at the moment, particularly around, for example, the measurement of heritage assets, impairment of assets, particularly infrastructure, and how to calculate replacement cost and other kinds of issues that are really relevant to the public sector. And the conceptual framework, I think it's just easier for us if the conceptual framework between ourselves and the ASB is aligned. So we would like to deal with these two issues. Again, we are also in the idea of taking stock. We don't want to change too many new things. So I think that's also why we are potentially suggesting that we don't deal with things like revenue and leases in the upcoming 3 years and rather wait to the next work program cycle to deal with those kinds of things, because you would of course know from a private sector perspective, you actually need to adopt those two simultaneously. In terms of making changes and enhancing the standards, we do undertake an improvements project. We only do it once every 3-year cycle. We don't sort of do it every year like some of the other standard setters. I think it works well for us that we are not constantly making changes. It's easier to know that there are changes every 3 years. You know how to locate the document. We can obviously provide you a good you about if there are any other enhancements that we could make to the standards. In terms of what we can do to promote the adoption of standards, there's two things that we want to focus on. So I did mention that the national and provincial departments don't apply our standards at the moment. So we will come up with a set of initiatives to really engage with the National Treasury and the Minister of Finance to see how we can gain a little bit of traction in this area. I think it does become problematic for a number of areas where the departments and the public entities in particular are on different accounting frameworks. Of course, consolidation isn't possible, but apart from that, I think it's really a bit of a drain on resources to have some people that focus just on modified cash and others that then focus on standards of GRAP. And I think if we could have a real centralized system that's applied by everyone, we could then focus on having specific skills across the sector that would hone in on that specific set of standards, as opposed to having all these diverse reporting frameworks in the sector. The other thing that we have heard, I think, from stakeholders is that there's too many directives, particularly that deal with first-time adoption issues. So I think a quick way of overcoming that is to really consolidate them. The directives really outline, for the most part, the transitional provisions and transitional arrangements for first-time adoption of the standards. As we are really left with the national and provincial departments, I think it's really time for us now to consolidate those and really make the handbook a bit more streamlined. So that's more an administrative matter for us. But again, I think it's in the same line of saying, well, let's take stock, let's see how we can clean things up. Try and do more internal projects as opposed to focusing a lot on issuing too many new things that would really make it difficult to adopt at this particular time. So in terms of how can we improve the process, I think self-reflection is always a good thing to do. I think the other thing that we want to make sure is that we have a proactive and constructive engagement with stakeholders throughout our process, whether it's setting standards or whether it's engaging on how they have been applied. So I think we are asking your views, particularly about how we can improve in these areas. And the first one is really facilitating and encouraging stakeholder engagement. If we don't have stakeholder engagement, our activities are just not relevant because we don't know whether or not what we are saying is implementable. We don't know what issues you have. Equally, it's an opportunity for us to share with you our thoughts and views on certain things, clarify issues. So we really need to have an open dialogue on various fronts on the standard setting process and beyond that. We do undertake reviews of the standards, which is a reflection of how the standards have really been implemented. And then obviously how we identify and respond to emerging issues. So in terms of what we are proposing, or some thoughts that we have included in our work program consultation, is in terms of facilitating and encouraging stakeholder engagement. I have to say that I think the virtual environment has worked in our favor. I think in the past, we used to have to jump on a plane, fly somewhere, give a day's presentation or so, and try and replicate that, 9 times over for various projects. And I think being able to do it virtually has really helped us reach more provinces, as well as more entities. And I think it's been cost effective from both parties. So I think the one thing that we didn't necessarily include in the work program consultation is that we will try next year to have more online, I want to say events, but sort of information sharing sessions from our perspective. Bearing in mind that the ASB is not a training organization, so you're never going to get training from us on the debits and the credits and so on, but really it's to share information about new standards, what the potential implications are, so that you can really go away and start planning. But there are a couple of things that we've been driving, or a couple of initiatives that we've been driving over the last 2 or so years. The first one is issuing fact sheets. And this was driven quite a bit by when we had an engagement about smaller entities and whether or not we could make changes to the standards to accommodate them. I think a lot of what we had heard was not so much about problems with the standards or that the principles were a problem, but it was really trying to make the standards scalable. So, the standards deal with entities, obviously, that could have everything. But if you're a very small entity, how do you pick out those things that are most relevant to you? So as an example, for financial instruments, we've done that. So if you have a look at the new financial instrument standard, you will find a fact sheet that deals with specific transactions. So it's sort of a case of, if you have a bank account, you go pull out the fact sheet for a bank account and it will tell you how to account for it. If you have just a normal investment, a creditor, a receivable, etc., you go pull out those and you account for them. We have issued a few for materiality as well. So we're trying to use the fact sheets as really an information bridge between the standards of GRAP and really communicating the principles in a more concise way. We don't plan to do this for all of the standards at this point in time, because not all of the standards require it. But what we are interested in is that if you do go onto our website and have a look at the fact sheets, which projects or which standards do you think could do with the fact sheet? And then obviously we will see how we can accommodate that. In terms of the newsletter and social media, we've been driving this quite a bit over the last 2 years in terms of entities signing up to our newsletter and social media. And we really use this as our primary tool for communicating events, for any issues that we are seeing in practice and how to respond to them. And obviously getting a feeling from you about how this is working, any particular kind of content you might like to see, or any other initiatives you might like us to undertake. Undertaking reviews of the standards, this has become a core component of our work. So as much as we set standards, we obviously need to review how the standards have been implemented. So it's really the follow on from that process. So every 3 years, we undertake one post-implementation review, which is really a full-out review of how the standard was implemented and how users are engaging with the information and whether or not it's achieving its objective. So we would have comprehensive surveys that we undertake with users, with preparers, with auditors. We have face-to-face discussions, roundtable discussions, pull together as much information as we can so that we can really see, okay, yes, we are getting the right information, it's being used in the right way, and obviously in the process identify if there are any implementation or application issues that we need to address in the standard. We do 2 desktop reviews. Now, desktop reviews is really us just looking at the published financial statements to assess compliance with either a particular topic or with a particular standard. This is a bit easier for us to do because it's obviously something we can do independently for the most part. We do have a consultation process where we would get a group of preparers together and really ask them, why is it that we are seeing what we are seeing in the financial statements, and if there's anything specific that we need to do to respond to those. And then we'll publish a review report, which will really describe our findings. And I think people have had a good reaction to these. I think inherently people want to do the right thing. It's just a case of maybe they didn't know that they or misread certain requirements of the standards or whatever it may have been. I think the key question here is on what should we be doing a post-implementation review and the 2 desktop reviews. So we have already in the past reviewed GRAP 16, 17, so those are the 2 asset standards, and we've reviewed GRAP 103 on heritage assets. So we have done, I think, quite a lot on the asset side. So I think, it would be great if we could move away from assets and have a look at something else. In terms of the desktop reviews, we've done one on the presentation of revenue in the financial statements. We've also done on the cash flow statement, and we've just completed one on the presentation of budget and actual information in the financial statements. So I think with that context in mind, if you can give us an idea of what else we could focus on in this 3-year period, that would really be appreciated. In terms of emerging issues, so there's a lot going on at the moment around financial reporting, financial accounting on the sustainability side. You hear this term sustainability, you hear ESG, which obviously deals with environmental sustainability and governance reporting. Obviously, a lot of that influences and affects the public sector. So as much as a lot of that reporting is outside the financial statements, the government sector is just as impacted by climate-related issues as any other sector. If you think particularly about municipalities and landfill sites, ESCOM and their generation and transmission. So all of these things have a way of filtering into the financial statements at some point in time. And I think what we are asking is there something specific we need to do for the financial statements in particular? The ASB is working on the sustainability standards framework that they are potentially going to issue. They're working on setting up the board at the moment. So that's obviously the bigger picture, but I think we're asking from a public sector perspective, let's start small and let's think about the financial statements. And if we should be doing something, what specifically should we be including? We've had a call from stakeholders about 2 years ago to do more on the disclosure of compensation of employees, particularly short-term compensation. I think with the increasing wage bill that is forever being talked about as a key driver of our economic woes, I think a lot of people are saying, well, we really need more disclosure on particularly just the basic salaries and benefits that get paid. Of course, the pension benefits, you would get quite a bit of information in the financial statements, but not so much on the short-term benefits. And is there something else that we should be including? And the last thing is on the reporting framework. So this is, again, something that we could do internally. I know we get questions. I know SAICA gets questions. I know all the professional bodies really get questions about this. But how do all the various reporting frameworks across, when I say the sector, the public and the private sector, all work together? So it's sometimes unclear who should apply IFRS, who should apply IFRS for SMEs, who's responsible for those 2 standards, who should apply GRAP, who's responsible for that, what does the charity sector or the not-for-profit sector do, the traditional authorities, there's the schools, for example. So we really thought of putting together a roadmap that would really explain that, because it sometimes isn't really clear to everyone involved who is responsible. So it's not that we are responsible for all of them, but we thought at least we have a good understanding of the various reporting frameworks with support from the Treasury, that it might be quite helpful if we had to put that together. But of course, these are all just proposals. If you read through the document, you might see some additional content that might prompt additional thoughts from you. But I would really urge you to read through the document. I'm going to stop and ask questions at the moment on anything that I have spoken about. But again, before I stop to ask questions, is really just to note that we have issued a questionnaire on our website. So if you just download that, you can fill it in quite easily and just send that back to us. If you just have one-line comment, please feel free to do that. It's not that you need to respond to all of the questions. We will be having full roundtable sessions next year, so I'll largely go through the same presentation again, but obviously we'll have an opportunity to stop and really talk and debate each of the sort of proposals that we are making. So it will be a lot more interactive then. You'll find the dates on our website shortly. And with that, I'm going to pause and just ask if there are any specific questions, comments, observations that anyone has.
All right. No, thank you, Janine. There is a bit of a conversation on the chat, but it's not, I don't think, a question as such. So we thank you for that.
Okay. So with that, just to say thank you to all of you. I think as we go into our sort of holiday period, I think just to say, please take care and stay safe. Enjoy the time with your loved ones, get some rest, and happy holidays. And thank you to Saika for having us again this morning.